I said, no, but it's not like that. It's not a gender issue. It has nothing to do with patriarchy. That's a whole made-up nonsense. It's actually fraud.
Quiero compartir con todos ustedes un video muy importante para comprender el negocio que existe detrás del feminismo. Y la persona que estará encargada de explicarnos será Erin Pizzey, una mujer británica quien fue la primera en crear un refugio para las mujeres maltratadas dentro del ámbito de pareja. Paradójicamente, aún habiendo ayudado a mujeres maltratadas, Erin ha sido tremendamente amenazada y perseguida por las feministas, ya que ésta desmantelaba y sigue desmantelando a este hipócrita movimiento. Dividiré el video en dos partes. La primera viene a continuación y la segunda subo mañana. Y si quieren ver la charla completa que también abarca a fondo el tema de violencia doméstica, dejo el link en comentarios.
I'm going to take you back to 1969, when the first movement, it was called the Women's Liberation Movement in those days, actually came across from America, because the original meeting was in Washington at that time, and a group of leftist Marxist women had got together at this very beginning meeting. In essence, they wanted a movement of their own. And they turned on their leftist men, partners and boyfriends and everything else, and said, look, we are going to change the goalposts. We need our own movement. We want our own funding. And there is very little money in left-wing movements. So what we'll do is it will no longer be capitalism that's the problem and that we're going to fight to overcome. We're now going to move it to patriarchy. And I think that's a brilliant strategy. As a branding issue, how better could you get than half the other part of the human race is going to now pay you for your movement that's going to exclude them and create a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar industry over the last 40 years. And year by year, the money gets bigger and bigger. And the numbers of people who fall by the wayside, and certainly the suicide rates for men, the men dragged out of their homes, the laws that are being made to isolate. The movement that they created was actually nothing to do with women's needs. They brought to us a Trojan horse. It was called equality, and there needed to be changes made to make women equal in those days. And so, yes, all of us, and men, welcomed this new movement with open arms. But when I heard what was going on in the collectives, and I heard this, the most chilling phrase to me, and I called it the planned destruction of the family, was that what was said is the new parenting, the new structure would be women and children. That would be the new movement. And men would be disenfranchised because marriage was no longer a safe place, had never been a safe place for women and children. And so gradually the ideas began. At that point, I had fought myself to a standstill with this movement. So eventually, long story, but I was thrown out and banned from every single collective. So I went off to do a vision that I'd had from when I was a very small child. And so that part of me thought, all right, the women's movement isn't where we can heal broken people. The women's movement has no interest in domestic violence. Its only main interest is and always has been money. And until you grasp that, then you don't really understand what's going on. So I went off, opened a tiny community center for mothers and kids who were alone because their husbands were working. They had small children where we could meet and actually work in our communities. I wrote the first book in the world on domestic violence. It was called Scream Quietly or the Neighbors Will Hear. That was Jeannie's husband said when he was beating her. And I remember she was telling me this, and I said, well, can I use that? It's a fantastic title. And I wrote the book, and I included all the letters. I'd never written a book, so I had all the letters I had, and what was happening at that time. And at the end of it, I put a whole list of all the agencies who knew exactly what was going on, and they all queued up to sue me. But then the cat was out of the bag, though. They could no longer pretend this was not an issue, because the press got behind it, and so did the public. My problem was they only wanted to hear about innocent victims of partners' violence. What enraged them and made me the enemy was I said, no, but it's not like that. It's not a gender issue. It has nothing to do with patriarchy. That's a whole made-up nonsense. It's actually fraud. At that